Hello everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel, M Stewart Paintings. On today's acrylic painting tutorial we're going to paint this gorgeous sunset beach landscape painting. It's a much more advanced tutorial, but step by step we're going to learn together how to use brush techniques and palette knife techniques to paint realistic things like clouds, waves. I'm going to teach you how to mix realistic tones so you can create shadows for your work and lovely highlights so you can add extra depth and realism to your ocean waves and learn how to paint water. So we're going to paint this gorgeous advanced landscape together, so let's get into it. So the colours you're going to use for today's painting tutorial are titanium white, cad yellow, matte orange, rose pink, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, Prussian blue, iris purple, burnt umber and matte black. Now I've got a burnt sienna painted canvas that I've used chalk to create an outline. We're going to have some faraway cliffs in the background here. We're going to have a nice light source and some clouds and sky in the middle. We're going to have this gorgeous big wave which I'm going to teach you how to paint ocean wave, and some wash. We're going to have some wet sand and then the beach itself. So just like always, I'm just going to speed up the footage. I've got some cobalt blue where I'm just going to block in where I want the shadows to be, just so I've got a rough outline of everything, and then I'll put the footage back down to the normal speed. So if you'd like to pause the video and just jot down the outline, you are very welcome to do so, and away we go. So I've dried this. We've got this nice dark outline on our canvas, so I know roughly where everything's going to be. I know where our waves and our horizon and my beach and everything's going to be. So we're going to learn how to create light and create a really lovely visual sunset and create realism using colours and tones. So the first thing we're going to do is mix some sky colour for underneath our sun. So if you ever see an ocean sunset, they tend to have a really bright sun and you tend to have warm colours around it, and it gets darker, the sky gets darker in colour as the sun sets and the sun goes down. So what we want to do is we want to create warm colours around the sun. So we're going to take some orange, a little bit of purple, some yellow and a dot of pink just to make it a little bit more natural. We're going to add plenty of white just to make our colour very creamy looking, and we're going to add a dot of black just to suck a little bit of the colour and vibrancy out of the mix. We want to make it look more natural. So all I'm doing, I'm just spreading all the paint together, mixing it up. And what we're trying to do is around the sun and the horizon, we want to use sort of natural yellowy orangey colours, and they're going to be the light as the sun is setting and it's going down underneath the horizon. We just want to make all the colours on the horizon very light in tone. So don't worry if you paint over your horizon, if it's not straight. We'll measure that out later and we'll make sure you have a nice straight sea level. All you want to do is just block in the base colours. So I thought we'll paint along at real speed today. I won't fast forward it or anything. What we'll do is we'll go right up to the base of the top of our mountains and right up to the base of the horizon, and we just want to block it in with this nice warm colour. And while we've got that colour, what I'm going to just do is, if you think the sun is going to shine directly across the ocean, so when it hits the beach it's going to be almost like a reflection of the sky. So while we've got that colour, I'm just going to use it just to block in the wet sands, because that's where the light is going to shimmer as it moves towards the viewer. So we're going to take some of this purple and white. Now to mix that colour that I've just added to the mix, all you do is you get cool purple, lots and lots of white and a dot of black. You can add a dot of cobalt blue if your purple's a bit red-y. So if your purple's a bit on the red side, if you add a little dot of cobalt blue, lots and lots of white and a dot of black, and you just mix it into the colour we just made, and we're just making a more natural sky colour. So if you think the sky is really bright at the base and around the sun, and as it moves upwards it gets less light and it gets darker, so we want to make more bluer tones. But it's a real ask and a big jump to jump from yellow and orange to blue, and if you try to mix that you'll get green, and you don't really ever see a green sunset. So what we want to do is we want to sort of bridge the gap between the oranges and yellows and blues. So by adding a little purple, lots and lots of white to your mix, we can just make this sort of creamy sort of yellow ochre sort of colour. So what we want to do is we want to have that lightest colour around the sun, because obviously that's getting the most light. So if you think around the sun, the sky is going to be at its brightest. So we want to imply that. And what it does by having our sun in the centre, it just gets the viewer to focus on something. So having a thing in the background, it just gets the viewer to be looking, so almost like they're standing on this beach looking out into the ocean and into the sunset. So it gives you a good focal point. Now if you can dry your work just either naturally or using a hairdryer, what we'll do, I'm just going to swap to a bigger brush. I'm just going to reapply the same colour just with an extra layer of paint, just to make the colours look more vibrant. And where we're using the burnt sienna, I've noticed lots of brush marks and streak marks where the paint is quite watery. I'm just taking it out. So all I'm doing, I'm just neatening it up with the exact same paint. The great thing about acrylics, they dry very, very quick. So if you want to neaten areas up and just make sure your paint is nice and thick, you don't want any of the canvas shining through, you can just reapply the paint. So you can see here quite clearly we've got a darker shade of yellow and a lighter, creamier shade of yellow. So what we want to do is we just want to blend them together. So by just adding an extra layer of paint and by using a nice smooth brush, we can just blend these two transitions together just so you don't notice the jump in colour, and it makes it look more natural. So again, just spending an extra 2 minutes going over something, just using a soft brush or a blender brush just to blend the two colours together. Now originally I was using a cad orange light and a cad yellow deep hue, but they were too light in tone and too yellowy. So I actually swapped to my good old cad orange and my good old cad yellow. So at the beginning of the tutorial I was using a more yellowy orangey tone, and it just doesn't work. It's too golden in colour. Look, if you see here, as I say, it's too yellowy. We want it more orange and we want it more natural. This colour would be perfect around the sun just to give it a good glow, but it's a bit natural, and I didn't want to put those colours on the colour list at the beginning because they're a bit weird. So good old cad orange, which is a bit more natural orange. Cad orange light is a bit more like a pumpkin colour, so we want more of a dark orange. So by adding the same colour to the mix, so it's orange, a little bit of purple, some pink and lots of white, and you can have a dot of yellow and a dot of black if you want to. We just want to make a type of tan sort of colour. And the reason we put orange and purple together is it makes a kind of natural light browny colour. So what we're trying to do, again, we're trying to make it more vibrant around the sun. So by using warmer colours and tones such as yellows and oranges, we want to insinuate heat around our light source. So all I'm doing, I'll go right down to the horizon. Because sometimes in painting you don't get something first time. Sometimes you just have to see when the paint is on your palette if it actually works. So sometimes you've got to make adjustments mid-video or mid-tutorial or mid-painting. And that's totally fine. That's part of being a good artist, is sensing where your picture looks a bit cartoony and not as natural, and adjust into it. So it's the same trick. All I'm doing was adding that purple and white to the mix. I'm just making the colours a bit more vibrant. So again, I'm just trying to take some of these brush marks out, and where the paint has dried, it might have dried quite thin and watery. You can see the burnt sienna underneath. But I just want to mix the two tones together. So while it's wet, I'm just gently going back and forth, like rocking something to sleep. Look, create little X shapes really, really easily. And the paint's just merging. You see how it's just merging together, the two colours? So hardly any pressure pushing down, just really gently. Look at that. Super easy. And just by having more paint going over the top, the colours look much more vibrant. They look much more realistic. If you're painting along in oils, you probably could do this first time. But as I say, with acrylics, because they're water-based, they're a bit thinner in texture. So sometimes you just got to apply 2 layers just to give it its vibrancy. So we're just going to add a little bit of titanium white just to have our central point so we know where the sun's going to be. So now we're going to work on the top of the sky, so we're going to get darker in colour and tone as we move away from the sunlight. So we want to do that by using darker, cooler tones. So blue is perfect for that. So we're going to mix cerulean blue, which is the more turquoise blue, and cobalt blue, which is the more cooler of the two blues. We're going to add a little bit of white, and mixing them together you should get this lovely sort of bluey greyish colour. It's a very light misty blue. Now unfortunately I had a dirty brush. I hadn't let my yellow paint dry, and I mixed it and I got a bit of too much of a green colour. So if you ever get that, just dry your work and just clean your brush and just mix the colours together, because you don't want to have green. As I keep saying to you, it will look a bit strange if you have too much of a green. So we want to have a nice bluey tone. So just off screen, I'm just cleaning my brush, and we've got cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and we're going to add a little bit of purple to the mix and a little bit of burnt umber. Now burnt umber again just makes it look more natural. It's really, really good if you're making sky colours and you're making ocean water colours. So by adding, there we go, that's a bit more bluer. So by adding a little bit of brown, a bit of burnt umber, it gives your colours a more natural look. It's a really strange trick. A lot of people won't know that. But by adding a little bit of brown or a little bit of purple, you can make your colours look much more realistic. See, look, I'm giving you all my paint recipes here. So look, same trick. Where that horrible bit of yellow on my brush left a bit of a green sky, we're just going to go over it. That's the great thing about acrylics. They're very forgiving. You can just paint over areas. If you don't like something, just dry it with a hairdryer and just paint over the top. So I'm just going to block it in. Again, don't worry if it's streaky. We'll just go over it. It's more to sort of figure out the colour tones at first and just see if they're all working. So as we go to the top of the painting, if you think the light source is the sun, the top of the painting is not going to get much light. And also by making the colour darker, it frames the painting. So when you have it nice and framed, it just makes it look more realistic. So we're going to get some cerulean blue and some cobalt blue. We're going to add a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of black. We're not going to add any white this time. And we're just going to make a darker shade of the same colour. So what we want to do is we want to darken our corners and darken the top of our painting. So you can see here it's a lot darker than the previous colour. But we're just going to do the same technique. We're just like we did with the oranges, where we had the darker tone and the lighter tone. We're just going to blend the two together. And can you see now, by using a darker tone in the corners and at the top of the painting, what it does is it looks like the light is fading off into the distance, and it also just frames your composition. So we're just going to dry it, and I'm just going to mix a little bit more paint because mine are dried. So it's cerulean blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of purple, a little bit of brown, and you can add plenty of white, and you should get the first colour. And if you want it more lighter, you can add more cerulean blue. So if you want it more turquoisey, and if you want it more cooler, you can add more cobalt blue. So again, it's just sensing. So look, an extra layer of paint. Look how much more vibrant that is. Little trick. So look, by just adding a little bit more brown to the mix, I'm just going to take some of that blue out. I just want it more natural. Can you see how it just makes it more natural? More earthy in tone. So just by letting your orange section be dry before doing the blue section, you don't get a horrible green sky. Now unfortunately we've got a big jump, as I keep saying to you, but we'll fix that in a minute. But we just don't want to have a green sky. So as we go up, we're going to get darker. So we're not going to add any white, we're just going to make the same mix. So cerulean blue, cobalt blue, bit of brown, a little bit of purple if you want to, a little bit of black. So we're just making a much darker version, so look, much darker. We're just doing our X shapes with our brush, and we're just merging the two tones together. So try to cover up all that canvas. As I say, loads of people at home, everyone asks me, do I have to paint my canvas burnt sienna? No, you don't. If you want to paint on white, that's fine. The only reason I paint my canvas burnt sienna, can you see how this right hand corner, I can see very clearly where I've missed an area and I need to fix it and add more paint. If that was on a white canvas, I might not notice it so much. So that's the only reason I paint my canvas burnt sienna. You don't have to. Oops, got a bit of a chunk of paint here. So there we go. And all we're going to do, we're just going to do the same technique. We're just going to do the X shapes with our brush. And while the colour is wet, we're just going to merge the two tones and try to take out the jump by merging the transitions. If you have a jump, don't worry. You can always go back to the previous tone just by adding a little bit of white to the mix. Look. So just mix the previous tone and just lighten up areas. Now while we've got that colour, as I said to you, because it's a very natural colour, it's really good for the ocean. So what we want to do, because we want to mirror the sky on the water below, we're going to use that colour just to block in our ocean. So where we've got that cobalt blue outline, just leave it, try not to paint over it too much. Just go round it and just leave it as an outline, and that could be where our big wave's going to be. And again, because it's in the middle, it's a good central point for the viewer to look at. So as I say, don't worry if your horizon is wonky. My easel is a little bit battered and wonky, and when I'm filming sometimes it looks straight but it's actually a little bit wonky, so don't worry if it's wonky. We'll use some tape and we'll measure it later. So while we've got that colour, we're also going to use that for the froth coming up towards the beach. So look, there's a big jump between the bright light around the sun and darkest sky. So what we want to do is we want to merge that just so it looks more natural. So if you can please dry your painting and go to a clean brush just so you don't put blue all over your highlights. So please clean your brush and dry your painting so it's completely dry. What we're going to do is we're going to start adding highlights and start merging the sky with clouds. So I'm going to teach you all how to paint realistic clouds. So we're going to take some matte orange and some yellow, a little bit of purple, and we're just going to make a nice sort of creamy brown colour, a little bit of pink and a little bit of white. So there we go. So we've got this lovely sort of tannish colour, a little bit darker than before. By just adding a little bit of purple, it just cools the mix down. So orange adds heat, purple is cooler. We're just going to start adding some clouds, and we're going to start building up the detail. So all at the horizon, the clouds are quite flat. They tend to go straight across the canvas or straight across the sky. So they're normally in a line, and you get these sort of low forming clouds towards the horizon. They sort of go straight across. So what's that called? Horizontal. So if you think of that. So as they go up, they tend to go all over the shop. And some go diagonally and some go round, because obviously the world is a globe. So good rule of thumb is the ones towards the horizon, if you try to do them straight across like horizontal, and as you go upwards you can start putting them at more funny angles and shapes. So all we're doing, as you can see if I zoom in for you, is we've got a dry canvas. I've got barely any water on my brush, and I'm just merging the two sections together by adding little clouds. So just around the base of the horizon, you tend to get low forming clouds that sort of sit there right on the horizon. So by just using hardly any paint, I'm just pushing down with my brush. I'm just trying to create the impression of low clouds just above the sea on the ocean. And as I say, the ones that go across just by the sun. So look, if you want to make your mix a little bit more bright to be around the sun, you can add orange and yellow. And if you want to make it more cool, you can just add purple. So by mixing purple and orange and pink, so look, we're just getting cooler. So by adding more purple than orange, add a little dot of black just to make it natural. So purple is perfect for cooler tones. So less orange and more purple, a little bit of pink. So if we move to either side of the sun, these areas are getting less sunlight, so they're cooler in colour. So again, if you want to add blues, that makes things cooler. So all we're doing, where that orange meets that blue, we're just using clouds. We've got a very dry brush, and we're just pushing down. And by pushing down with a completely dry brush, I haven't got any water on my brush, and having very little paint on my brush, it leaves this sort of chalky residue of paint on your canvas. So what I'm doing, I'm just implying all these little clouds. So look, I've got no water on my brush, got barely any paint. You can even, if you dip your brush in some paint, if you use a tissue just to wipe off 80% of the paint, and then just have barely any on your brush. I use my top because I always wear scruffy clothes. And look, you just push down onto the canvas and just give an impression. So what we're doing, we're creating the cooler of the clouds that are getting some sunlight, but not too much, as they fade off into the distance. So that's why they've got a bit of purple in them, because these ones are nice and wispy and cool. So look, all we're doing, we're just merging the two sections of the sky using the clouds. So as I say, take your time, relax, don't have very much paint on your brush. I'm using a haggard sort of beaten up brush. You can see it's got some bristles, if you can see, So that's sort of coming out from it. And what that does is, just because it's a bit rugged, it puts all the sort of clouds in different directions. So if you've got an old brush, you can always take a bit of scissors to it, just make it a bit more haggard and give it a good old beating. And then it's very, very good for using things like clouds. So can you see, look, there's hardly any paint, and I'm just pushing sort of chalky residue onto the canvas, and I'm going a bit more diagonal now, and these are just all the bits of clouds. So look, if I zoom out, it's starting to take shape. So they're the cooler of the clouds. So now we're going to add some highlights over the top. So we're going to mix orange and some pink. Still going to have a bit of purple, but not as much. And we're going to create a warmer tone. So we're going to add plenty of white now. Still a little bit of purple, because we don't want it too warm just yet. So let's test this one out. There we go, that's a little bit nicer. We're going to do the same technique. We're going to add a little bit more white just to make it a little bit brighter. There we go. And we're going to wipe off most of the paint. So you couldn't see there, but I just wiped it off in my t-shirt. As I say, I just wear scruffy painting clothes. I wear old clothes that I don't tend to fit in now. I've gone out of style. And I just wear them to paint in. So if I get covered in paint, it doesn't matter. But they're perfect for wiping your brush or use a bit of kitchen roll. So all we've got here is we've got a light sort of orangey purple colour. And we're just going to punch a bit of holes in the sky, just to imply some cooler clouds. And just going to put some highlights. It's the same technique. Got no water on my brush, got barely any paint. The sky is always the hardest bit. So I always say in these tutorials, learning how to paint light and learning how to paint clouds and the skies, it takes time. And if you think we're going to do this tutorial together step by step in under an hour and a half, and you're going to paint this really, really good painting in under an hour and a half, but it does take time. You can't just, I know in today's day and age everyone has not much of an attention span, but that's why they don't master anything. So if you want to be the master, you've got to put in the hours. So look, my haggard brush is just putting little impressions. I'm still leaving some of the purpley ones underneath. And what that does is it gives a good impression of some clouds that are in the shade and some that are getting more of the sunlight. So I'm just creating little random shapes and impressions. So try to think where the sun would be shining on these clouds. So some of the clouds, their bottoms, like they're underneath their bellies, would be getting sunlight. Others, it would be the edges. So a lot of these tutorials like this one, I've painted so often, I do them out of my imagination. So this is not a real place. This is just totally out of my imagination. So try to work out, as I keep saying to you, once you get so good you can do this on automatic pilot, try to work out where the light would be shining in the sky. So that section is looking cool. I'm happy with that so far. Let's have some light and some wispy clouds going the other way. All we're doing is thinking, if the sun is in the middle and all these clouds are going either way, they're picking up highlights from the sunlight. So can you see, by merging the the two sections now using the clouds, it's gradually getting rid of that horrible jump in the background sky between the dark blue and the lighter horizon yellowy oranges. So as I say, we're just using the clouds and using this technique to bridge the two gaps. So maybe some of these ones are getting some sunlight, just a tad. So there we go. If I zoom out, I'm just reapplying my sun just to make it more vibrant. Again, just adding a second layer of paint. Just going to make it a bit more squishy, a bit more going all over the shop, because that's the way light sort of goes. It's not perfectly circular. So I'm going to get some cad orange in purple. And I'm not going to add any white. I'm just going to make quite a bright colour. So the more orange around the sun, because obviously that's going to be warmer. So that's why I'm adding more orange than purple. And as it goes more to either side, I'm going to add more purple. So first I'm just going to put some darker highlights now. So these are all the clouds getting lots and lots of sunlight and lots of heat. I'm going to get some cad yellow and some cad orange, mix them together. And I'm going to make a really vibrant yellowy orange. So think of sort of a peach colour. So really, really bright, more yellow than orange, please. And around the sun, we're going to create sort of a glow effect. So around our sun, it's going to be super vibrant, super hot. So we want to use our hottest colours to imply that. So we want to use bright yellows and oranges and whites. And all these clouds, because they're nearest to the sun, they're getting the most sunlight and the most heat. So again, it's trying to think some of the underneath of these clouds would be picking up the highlights. So I'm just going underneath where I've created shapes. And I'm just trying to imply highlights on their base. And around my sun, just so it looks like it's glowing. Some of these clouds, as the light sort of escapes through them, they're going to have some harsh highlights, some really bright highlights. So they're going to get some sunlight that really shimmers on them. So you see it's starting to come together. As I say, the sky and the clouds are always the hardest bit. And it's just practice. It's just taking your time. So these areas either side are going to be cooler, they're going to be darker. So the clouds are going to be a little bit cooler in tone. So we're going to use some of that purple and white. We're going to add some pink to the mix. Still got a little bit of yellow on my brush because I can never be bothered to clean my brush. But it actually works out, as I say. So purple, a little bit of yellow, plenty of white. And we're just going to make some cooler bits of the sky. So as I say, we can't really jump from bright orange and yellow to dark blues. So just by using a little bit of yellow, purple and white, and creating sort of a lavender sort of tone, like a very pastel purple. Still got a bit of heat in it because it's got some yellow in it. We can just punch some holes in the sky and make some sort of holes and clouds that just again join the two areas together. Make it look more natural. So all I'm doing now is I'm just getting some cad yellow, and I'm just creating a circle around my sun. So it's very hard to see because it's very zoomed in. And then I'm just getting cad yellow and going around my white sun, and I'm just creating sort of a glow around the sun again, just to make it look brighter. And I'm just, with a wet brush and hardly any paint, I'm just smearing it into the previous colour, just again so the transition looks more natural. It just gives your sun a little extra glow. It just makes it look like it's, because of that cad yellow, it just gives it a tiny bit extra glow. So I'm going to get some cad yellow and lots of white, and I'm just going to make a sort of more lemony colour. I'm just going to add some brighter highlights on the base of these clouds and tips of these clouds around the sun. So again, all these little stages add up. If you skip a stage, it won't add up and you won't get the same effect. So that's why I keep saying to you, have patience, do each stage, put the shadows and the underpainting, the base colours on first for your sky, then start building up your shadows and your highlights over the top. So you can see now it's giving you a focal point to look at. So by having that really bright sun, your eyes are drawn to it. So look at that, it's starting to get really real. This is starting to look cool. So we've got this lovely darkened corners, and we've got this bright light source. We've got this nice transition in our sky. So we're going to start working on everything and move towards the viewer. So we're going to start doing all the detail. So as I say, the sky is always the hardest, so well done for all working through it and doing really well. We're going to measure a nice straight line. You can see here how wonky my canvas was because my horizon was way off. So use the tape measure, use some chalk, get some painting tape. Make sure your painting is nice and dry before applying this tape, and just create a nice straight horizon. And we're going to create the mountains. So we're going to use Prussian blue. Now Prussian blue is just black with plenty of cobalt blue in it. So you don't actually have to buy a Prussian blue. You can just get cobalt blue and just add bits of black to it, so you get a very, very dark blue. So it's not pure black, it's got plenty of blue in it. So all we're going to do is we're just going to create little bumps and little texture. We're going to go straight down to our tape, so we have a nice straight horizon for our water. And we're just going to create a silhouette of some faraway cliffs. So if you think our nice sunset ocean and a nice beach, we're going to have the wave. So what we want to do is we just want to create a little bit of depth, a little bit of perspective. So we're just going to add some faraway cliffs just to make it all look a bit more real and a bit more authentic. So there we go, we're just blocking it in really nice and easy. And if we remove our tape, you can see how wonky my horizon was. So you always measure, don't do it by eye. Always measure it. So look, you see those chalk marks show you where the water should have been. So just by measuring the area, we can change it. So it's nice and dry. That mountains I've just dried, so I'm not going to put this tape over the top of a wet painting because it will lift up all the paint. So make sure your work is nice and dry. Measure your horizon. So look, I'm trying to get it bang straight. There we go. Perfect. A little bit of a struggle. So if you're ever worried, just invest in a tape measure and just measure your horizon. Because the worst thing you can do is have a lovely painting that you've spent hours on. It looks absolutely great. And when you go and hang it on the wall, it's wonky. So just take your time, measure everything. And we're going to block in our water now. So now that we know where everything is and we've got our lovely sky starting to take shape, we're going to start adding all the detail to our waves. And I'm going to teach you how to paint realistic ocean water. So we're going to create our colour that we had before, which was cerulean blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of white. So the same as the light colour in the sky. We're going to go right up to the tape so we get a nice straight horizon. So all I'm doing, I'm just blocking it in. Again, don't worry if you get any streaks or any brush marks. You can do the same technique where you just dry it and go over it. But we just want to work on our transitions again first. So what we're doing again, just like we did with the background sky, where we painted the sky first and then we added all the highlights and shadows over the top, we're going to do the same with the ocean. So it's called an underpainting. We're going to create an underpainting. So I'm going to add plenty of white to the mix we just made. I'm going to add a little bit of brown just to make our seawater look more natural. So there we go. And on the left hand side, I'm just going to make it a little bit lighter, because as water gets more shallow, it gets lighter in tone because it's less dense. So if you think of really deep water, it's very, very dense and you've got really dark blues. But as it comes into the beach, it gets more shallow because there's hardly any water and you can stand in it. So just by adding a little bit of white and a little bit of brown, just to make it more natural, just on the left hand side, and just as it gets, the water gets more shallow as it comes up to the beach and we get that lovely sort of wave, we're going to imply that by using a lighter colour. So again, all these colours, all these tricks and recipes I'm giving you are to show you how in reality how nature does all these wonderful tricks. So look, we're just getting more shallow as we come towards the beach. There we go. So it looks a bit scruffy because obviously we've got a big jump between the dark tone, but before we do that, we're just going to use that colour just to block in our wet sand. And again, don't worry if your wet sand's a bit scruffy. We'll neaten everything up. We just want to sort of gauge the colours first. So we just want to make sure all our colours and all our tones look pretty realistic. So we've got the light source in the middle, so that's going to be nice and warm in the reflection. And then because we're a bit further away from that really bright sun, we've got nice cool colours for our wet cool sand. So there we go, all blocked in. So let's give it a dry and let's just rework it. So we're just going to apply exactly the same colours, and any bit of the burnt sienna that I can see, look, there's lots of scruffy bits and lots of streak marks I can just go over. Now there's a big jump between that darker blue and the lighter blue as the water gets very shallow. So by mixing an in-between colour, a bridge tone, where it's got some white but not too much white, I'm just going to create a middle shade. So not too dark, not too bright, just right. Think of the Three Little Bears. So look, I'm just going to create a middle shade. So it's not as dark as the far corner, but it's obviously not as light as the shadows. So there we go, it's still quite blue. And I'm just going to merge the two together. So just like the sky, we're just trying to make all the transitions look natural so you don't notice them, basically. If you think of it like this, if you get so good, you won't notice these transitions. So all we're doing, we're just blending all these colours together. And then I'm just going to go up here. Clean my brush, and just with hardly any paint, just like we did with the highlights in the sky, I'm just going over, and there's chalky residue of the paint, and I'm just blending it into the previous tone to get the transition look really, really perfect. There we go. And then because we've got a big jump as it comes into the shallows, we're just going to add more white to get the previous tone. And look, we're just going to blend these two tones. So look, all we're doing, look, same technique over and over again. We're trying to make it that you don't notice the transitions. So by taking your time on each stage before you move on to all the detail. So that looks a little bit too pastel. Didn't have enough brown in it. It's not cool enough. It looks a bit too bright. That would be perfect for a highlight colour. So just by adding a little bit more brown to the mix. There we go. That's the previous tone. And look, I'm just doing the same technique. I'm just blending them in together. So look at that. Starting to work. So we don't want any big jumps in colour. We want to make them look really natural. So that's looking awesome. While we got that colour, why not use it to add some highlights of some shimmer on our wet sand? Because we've got that dark, more browny blue underneath, we can use this lighter blue to add some subtle highlights of all the shimmer on the wet sand. So this could be all the sort of wet sand when the wave peels back, and you get that sort of lovely shimmer of light on the wet sand. So we're going to get some Prussian blue. So it was black and lots of cobalt blue, which we get a very, very dark Prussian blue. And we're going to go right up to the tape with a flat edge brush, and we're just going to draw in our horizon. So we're going to go right up to the edge and just outline it. And what we're going to start doing, if you think of like the clouds as they go at the horizon, they're very, very flat waves. They're very, very straight, and they're very, very flat. So what we're going to try to do is we're just going to try to create little lines with our really dark brush, really dark paint, excuse me, and our flat brush. So we're going right up to the line, and we're just outlining our ocean horizon. And then I'm going to block in here this big wave. So I'm just going to gauge where it's going to be. And same here as the wave comes up to the ocean. So I'm just starting to think where I want things to be. So at the top of the horizon, if you think all these waves are really far away, you can barely see the caps of the waves. So what we want to do is we want to make them very thin and very, very flat. And as they come down to the beach, they're going to get thicker and they're going to get further apart, if that makes any sense. So they're not as bunched together. And some of them are going to be the big one as the sort of wave pushes up. So I'm just sort of gauging where I want the big wave to be and how big I want it to be. Just using my flat brush. And normally waves create sort of a barrel effect. So what I want to do is I want to have it sort of come up So the great thing about a flat-headed brush is you can do this. You can sort of go diagonally and you can scrape down, you can create really easy big wave shapes. So all I'm doing is just blocking in where I want the shadow of the wave to be. Now the reason we're using a really dark colour in the Prussian blue is not only does it give it a really nice shadow effect, if you think this wave is going to have its back to the sunlight, so all this bit is going to be in the shade. So now I know where the big wave is, I'm going to start building up the ocean. So I'm going to have a few other big waves coming up, but they're not as big because they're further back. So all I'm doing, I'm just creating little gaps in the underpainting to allow it to shine through. And as I go up to the horizon, I'm going more again across, more horizontal, just like the clouds. And I'm making them very thin, very, very far away, just to imply that. So they're more bunched together and they're very thin and more flat. And as they come down, they get bigger, more at different angles. So these ones are a bit bigger, a bit of funny angles to match the wave. So can you see how our ocean is becoming more 3D? So it's that underpainting. Can you see the transition in the colour? You're not even noticing it now, because now the wave is on top. You're not noticing it. So all these little steps, they're the trick. Work on the steps and then put the detail over the top. And remember, if you're struggling at home or you're brand new to my channel and you're watching this tutorial and you've never heard of me, we have plenty of painting tutorials, landscape tutorials. We have plenty of how to paint waves, how to paint an ocean, how to paint water, how to paint a sunset, even things like forest landscapes. So there's plenty in the playlist here on my channel now. So make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you so much for everyone who has already liked and subscribed and always writes comments. I really appreciate the support, and thank you so much for sharing your work. So look, all I'm doing is I've got hardly any paint on my brush. I'm just using the edge of the brush just to imply little dots and lines to imply detail. So it's up to you how detailed you want to go. But all we're trying to do, I've got some of these lines linking up to where we're going to have the froth of the wave come up to the beach. So again, take your time. When you think your wave is looking really 3D, so that all I'm doing here is I'm just creating some holes, sort of divots in the water where the wave sort of comes up. It creates these sort of little divots and caps, little shadows of the waves. So as I say, you do it so often it becomes automatic. So that's looking pretty realistic. That's looking pretty cool. I'm liking our wave. I'm just going to darken up this area now it's dried, because obviously this area's got its back to the sun, so it's going to be more in the shade. And I want to create a dark shade tone so I can add highlights and add some sea foam and froth of the wave. So I want to make it nice and dark before I add the detail over the top. So I'm going to get some of the previous colour we mixed, which was cerulean blue, cobalt blue, burnt umber, purple and white. So I'm just going to make a little bit of a cool blue. So I'm just mixing that all together. That's nice and cool. And I'm just going to dab my brush with plenty of paint. I'm just going to dab it head on, like push down, I'm just going to create the illusion of foam. So where you have a wave come up, you get all that sort of lovely sea foam and froth. So what I'm doing, just do it up to about here, I think. I don't want to do too much. I want to keep a bit of the shadow. So this is sort of all the sort of wave. And again, it's in the shade, but we want to add some highlights. So by adding a little bit of white to the mix, it's still a really cool blue because it's got cobalt blue and purple in it. But because it's got plenty of white now, just over the top, I'm just going to do the same technique. I'm going to leave some of that cool highlight to shine through and some of the dark shadow. I'm just going to add some highlights over the top. And this could be all the froth that's getting a bit of sunlight. So that's looking cool. Look at that. It's looking really 3D already. And I'm going to go back to my Prussian blue. And I'm just going to create, just like we did with the wave, I'm going to put the shadow tone on first, and then we'll put the detail and the highlights over the top. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use Prussian blue and a smaller brush. I'm just going to block in the shadow of all the sort of sea foam as it comes up onto the beach. So I'm going to leave some of that burnt sienna and that cool purpley blue underneath. I kind of like that colour. I think it looks pretty realistic. And the good thing about the burnt sienna, even if it shines through a little bit, is when the sunlight hits sort of cool colours, it creates sort of a nice reddy orange colour. So it actually works. So I'm just going to outline the base of our wave. So if you imagine when the wave comes up onto the shore, it sort of peels back and it leaves all this sort of foam, but you get a nice clear outline. So just by outlining it, again, it just makes it look more 3D. So if you flip your brush into a small brush, like a little fine liner, it's much easier just to get a small detail and a nice sharp line. So there we go, just using Prussian blue. So we're going to take our dark colour first. I'm going to do the same technique. I've just got a small brush and I'm just going to push down. I'm going to leave plenty of gaps in the underpainting, but I'm trying to create the illusion of bubbles and froth. So I'm just putting the darker of the highlights on first, so it's more bluey purple. So I'm pushing down and I'm just creating the impression of froth and sea foam. And try to have them all going a bit randomly in different directions and different shapes and sizes. You don't want them all being the same height, all the bubbles. You want to sort of have some going high and some going low, and it just makes it look more natural. So some places have thick ones, some places have high ones. There we go. So that's starting to look 3D. And I'm just going to think where the light is. That'll be coming straight down from the sun. So I'm just going to put a little bit of highlights first. Now remember, white will pick up the undercolour underneath, so it's going to pick up those cool purpley blues. So when it dries, it's actually going to dry very flat. So even though these highlights while you're watching the video now look really, really bright, once they dry, you'll barely notice them. So we're just leaving plenty of gaps to let the different shades of blue shine through. So same technique, just create little splats. You can even outline some of your waves. because you get that lovely sort of light effect where it outlines an area. So these are all the bits of the water, they're just getting a bit of sunlight as they froth up to the beach. They get a little bit of sparkle. So you can see on the left hand side, the ones we just did, now they're drying. You can barely notice them. They're just really subtle, these highlights. And I'm going to get that colour. I'm just going to start blocking in and make this wet sand a bit rounder. It's a bit frumpy, so I'm just going to make it a little bit rounder and smoother. So I'm trying to create a nice smooth ridge here. Our wet shiny sand. So a nice round curve here. And it comes around into the background. There we go. We'll neaten everything up in a minute. It's just more for the shape. So that's starting to look fabulous. So we're going to just create a shimmer now. Before we start doing the sand and everything, we're going to start creating a light shimmer. Now we could leave it like this, and you could have just a really nice ocean, but normally you get this beautiful light shimmer. So I thought, why not teach you that as well? So what we're going to do, we're going to get some bright titanium white, and we're just going to come directly down from the sun. So go straight down from your sun. And use a flat-headed brush. So just like we did the far off waves, we want to create little fine lines with little gaps in the underpainting to shine through. And this is all the shimmer of the light coming down from the sun. So try to come straight down from the sun and then just create sort of zigzag shapes. Leave gaps in the underpainting just so it looks like waves shining through. And you can even follow where you've created the sort of depths in your waves to create shapes with this light. So we've got this nice shimmer coming down from our sun onto the waves. And then that would come right down. So again, just like what we did with the highlights, the whites will look really bright now while we're applying them, but it will pick up that blue that's underneath it and dry. So just look at the foam now it's dry. They're very subtle, they look really realistic. So don't worry if you use plenty of white now, we can always make it less bright in a minute. So we just want to use titanium white, nothing else. Now we're going to mix some orange and brown and a little bit of purple. So orange and brown and a little bit of purple. And we're just going to put some shadow of the light first. I'm just going to wipe away most of the paint. And just on some of these waves, we're just going to make them have a little bit of a highlight. We'll go over this in a minute. But some of these waves are getting the sunlight, so that's why they're a little bit more orangey brown. So all we're going to do, we're just going to create a light effect coming down, because just having bright white looks a bit weird. So we're going to use orangey browns, just like we did with the clouds. We're going to just build up some sort of, so it looks like the light sort of fading off onto these waves. So either side of your shimmer, go right up to the tape, and just with, it's got hardly any paint, just sort of almost like glaze over the top of your painting either side on some of the waves. And we'll come down. So look, all we're doing, just sort of colouring in areas. It's got hardly any paint. Just going over the top in this orangey colour. It's just sort of this glow of the sun on the ocean. So if you think as the sun sets over the ocean, you get this lovely glow, lovely warm colour. So look, you can just colour in your waves if you want to, just so it looks like the sun shimmering down. And just like always, we're using this browny purpley tone first, and then we'll put the highlights over the top. So it looks a bit dark, that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put some brightness around it. So we're going to get some orange and yellow. So just like we did with the sun in the sky, we're going to add some heat. So by using orange and yellow, just around the white, we can just merge sort of the white into that darkish purpley orange. So again, it's just having a mixture between hots and colds. So again, we're just trying to create this glow effect. What it does is it just merges the white and makes it look less harsh. So it's all about trying to look natural, and that's what we're trying to do. So we've got some light highlights here just on the foam. And then straight onto the beach. So if you think that sun is like this super bright light, so think of a spotlight, and it's going to be shining on the surface. So if you think of the wet sand as sort of like ice or something, it would just have this completely mirror effect, like a reflection. So what we're going to do, we're just going to go around the edge and just give it a nice sort of shimmer. And we're just going to use that orangey yellow just to imply the heat. So again, we're just trying to mirror the sun on the wet sand. So just trying to match the light. As I say, if you go around it and just give it a nice sort of edge, it just gives that sort of shimmer that you get on sort of smooth surfaces. I'm just going to go right up to the tape. I'm just going to make under the sun really vibrant. So as I say, a lot of painting is just trying to work things out, just seeing what works, going back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to get some white now, and on the wet sand you're going to obviously have a shimmer of the sun, but it's not going to be a complete circle. It's going to be like all in shimmer and all wonky, because obviously it's coming down onto a surface. So by just using a little bit of bright yellow, a bit cad yellow, again it's just to imply the glow of the sun. So just move between the orange and yellow the yellow and the bright titanium white. And it should create a shimmer effect. So that looks cool. So I'm liking the wet sand, that looks really, really cool. Let's remove our tape. We should have a perfect straight horizon first time. Dun, 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 dun. Look at that. We've got this lovely shimmer that we've gone right up to the horizon. So even the shimmer is perfectly straight. And we're just going to make it a bit more natural. So I'm just going to get some yellow and orange. So all these little finishing details, these are all the little bits that just make the painting all come together. So as I say, a lot of painting is just sensing where you need to add some highlights, or the opposite, where you see something that's just a bit too bright, you need to dull certain areas. And sometimes when I'm doing the tutorial, I don't naturally flow, and so to speak. And when I mean flow, is a lot of painting is intuitive. I just know how to do things. When I'm doing the tutorials, I'm stopping and starting the camera obviously to film. So a lot of it, as I say, is just trusting your instincts. If you see areas that look a bit too dark or too bright, you can change them. So it's always good to take a step back from your work and just see which bits need a little bit more work. So all I'm doing here, I'm just taking some of the ocean colour that we made, and I'm just, with a dry brush, I'm just glazing over the top and just making the white not as harsh. So I'm just going over the top, and I'm just getting some Prussian blue, so that black and blue. I'm just going to put our wave back in. I just want to make the silhouette look more prominent, because I want that to be with the sun, push back that shimmer. So again, just little tricks, just seeing what works. Take a step back from your work. It's a good thing to do, especially if you're going for realism, by taking a step back and just seeing if all the colours work and all the shades. Because sometimes when you're watching something, especially through a phone or through a laptop or a TV, it's not got the same effect as seeing it with your natural eye. So I'm just darkening up this wave just with the Prussian blue, just so it looks more silhouetted. I'm going to get some black, and I'm just on the underneath, because this area has literally no light, because it's got its back, as I say, to the sunlight. This area is going to be really, really dark, almost silhouetted. So just want to imply certain areas as really, really harsh shadows. So by keeping your darkest darks to having the foreground, you can bring things towards the viewer. So by using really dark, almost blacks now, we can have our sea foam and our wave come really close to the viewer. So just putting some extra shadow and depth into my wave. So a flat brush is great for this, because as I say, you can just scrape it down. Flat brushes are also great for reflections. If you're ever painting reflections, they are really, really useful. So again, I'm just making some of these waves in that shimmer look more silhouetted and darker. It's looking awesome. So I'm just going to do the beach. So again, underneath the sun, we're going to have a more warmer colour. So I'm just going to use pure burnt umber, but underneath the sunlight, obviously it's going to have a more of a warmer tone. So by just adding a little bit of cad orange to your burnt umber, just underneath the shimmer, it should all match. And if you do the opposite, where you add either blues, blacks, or Prussian blue, so brown and Prussian blue. So basically any cool colour either side. It should frame the composition nicely. And again, you're painting, as it has nice darkened corners, just makes it nice and framed. So we want to make our left corner very dark, because obviously we're going to sign it there. So I always use very dark tones in the left corner, because I always want to put my signature there. So by just adding a little bit of black or Prussian blue to your burnt umber, what it does, again, it just tricks the eyes and it makes the sunlight look like it's shining on the beach under the shimmer. So just block all the sand in. It should look cool. We've got that lovely framed composition now. So we're just going to add some final details on everything just to make it look absolutely awesome. So I just want to add some highlights on my foam here, but I don't think a brush is going to surpass. I think the brush just doesn't do it justice. So a great technique to create sort of wash and sea foam or a wave impact is to use a palette knife. So all I've done here, I've got very little white, titanium white paint on my brush, sorry, on my palette knife. And all I'm doing, I'm scraping upwards. So I've got barely any paint on the tip of the palette knife. And I'm just scraping upwards. And all this does is it creates sort of froth and dots to create sort of wash. And it gives, again, look, it just adds a highlight. So this is all the area that's getting the sunlight. So again, just makes it look really realistic. So I'm just going to mix a cool blue again. So cobalt blue, cerulean blue, purple and brown. I'm just going to get my palette knife. So look, I've got barely any paint on the tip of it. I'm just going to do the same technique. So all I'm doing is just creating little dots and bubbles. This is all the sea spray as the water hits the beach. And you get that lovely ocean sort of sea foam and froth. So all we're doing by using the palette knife and scraping upwards onto your canvas, we're creating dots. So make sure your canvas is dry before doing that, because if you do make a mistake or you just don't like it, you can just wipe it away. So as I keep saying to you in all the tutorials, if you dry your work at each stage, if you do add a highlight or add some shadows and you don't like it, you can always just wipe it away with a wet cloth or a baby wipe. So I'm just putting my sun back in and I'm just going to create a glow again around it. So I'm just going to get some yellow and some white. So I'm just going to add some finishing touches just on my sky. So we're just going around it with some yellow and white. Now everything's dry. Some of the highlights have sort of been lost. So I'm just going over the top. So again, just like the shimmer in the water and the highlights on the wave, all we're doing is we're just using white and yellow around the sun and then swapping to cad yellow again just to create a glow on some of these clouds, just to create some heat, some vibrancy when that sunlight is hitting those nearest clouds. So again, it's just putting these last finishing touches in. So going around the sun just to give it a glow. I'm just going to add some bright highlights on some of these clouds. Some really sharp highlights. Fabby, that's so cool. Now, just like we did with the transitions, you can get a dry brush, get get a clean brush, and you can use these colours just to sort of glaze areas. So no water on your brush, just a completely dry brush, and what you can do is just glaze areas just for the heat. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of shadow here, just because I made a bit of a splat when I used my palette knife. So I'm just going to put the wave back in. But it's all starting to come together. So we've got our cerulean blue, cobalt blue, brown and white. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off most of the paint on my clothes. Look, but you can use a cloth obviously at home. And I'm just going to create, with a dry brush, I'm just going to glaze areas to create the illusion of sunlight poking through the sky. So if you've watched any of my other tutorials, when we create things like sunbeams, by having a dry brush and a dry canvas, you can wipe away most of the paint, and then you can glaze areas to create the sort of glow of the sun, or sunbeams. So to create a sunbeam, all we do is do a straight line, but first we're just going to glaze these areas. So look, watch, if you want to do a sunbeam, you can just come out and just do a straight line, and these are all bits of sunlight that's sort of coming out in between the clouds. So you don't need much paint, you can just wipe it with your finger, and it just implies a little bit of sunbeams coming out. So they're really subtle. And as I say, if you've dried your canvas and you do one that's wonky or anything like that, so get rid of all the paint near enough. If you've got barely any paint, make sure you've got a nice dry canvas, nice dry brush. And if it's like this, if it all goes wonky and you don't like it or anything, you can always just wipe it away with a baby wipe. So all I'm doing, just glazing areas just to imply sunlight. And remember, if you've dried your work and you do a sunbeam that you don't like, or you go a bit too heavy-handed, you can always just wipe it away with a baby wipe or wet cloth. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just glazing areas. I'm just trying to create the illusion of sunbeams and light poking out from the clouds. So watch, if I zoom a bit out for you, look, just go straight up, hardly any paint, just a chalky residue, just create a really lovely sunbeam, and that looks much more realistic. So I'm just going to get some yellow and orange. Again, I've got barely any paint, the canvas is totally dry, my brush is totally dry, and I'm just glazing this area just to imply the heat of the sun onto those nearest clouds. So again, just matching all the light. There we go, easy peasy. So just put a little bit here, why not? A little bit either side. Just all matches. So I think she's done. She looks fantastic, super realistic. So you've learned how to glaze it. You've signed it in the left hand corner. We've got this lovely light effect. We've got this lovely shimmer on our ocean. You've learned how to paint a realistic sunset clouds. You've learned how to darken up your corners, how to paint these clouds with highlights. We've got the light effect in the ocean. We've got this shimmer. We've got this lovely dark waves. So you've learned how to paint waves. We've got our sunset over the ocean, and we've just got this general sunset beach, beautiful acrylic painting. So my name is Murray. Thank you so much for painting along with me real time, step by step. I've really enjoyed painting along with you guys at home. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We've got plenty of acrylic painting tutorials here on my channel. And wherever you are, take care of yourself. Look after yourself, guys. See you soon. Take care. Bye.